Over the weekend, the House of Representatives passed a $95.3 billion package of bills. And that's usually just the top line, is what you get over and over again from people. I wanted to dig into the details of each of the four bills, so I asked Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired from the United States Navy, Vice President of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, to join me. Good morning, Admiral. Thank you for coming back so soon.
Hey, thank you for having me, Hugh. Really excited to be here today and discuss a really important topic.
Well, let's begin with the portion of the bill that went to Israel. It's called the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, 26.38 billion. It starts with 4 billion to replenish Iron Dome and David Sling. You want to explain what that means?
Sure, thanks. So, Iron Dome and David Sling are Israeli made, although the Iron Dome is made with U.S. With assistance from U.S. Factories in Arizona and with U.S. Investment in the technology. So, Iron Dome and David Sling are two of the three key portions of Israeli integrated missile defense. So, Iron Dome is particularly good against rockets and mortars. So, it was used very heavily in the October 7th and in the immediate days thereafter with attacks from Hamas. And it would also be very critical to any engagement with Hezbollah from the north, Hezbollah having somewhere between 150 and 170,000 rockets, mortars, and missiles. So that's Iron Dome. David Sling is their counter cruise missile. It's the Israelis had Patriots and they decided to go down their own path. So it's a Patriot-like uh, cruise missile defense system. It's used against kind of high-end cruise missile threats, mostly from Hezbollah or Iran itself. Those two systems are key to Israel's self-defense against attacks from their neighbors by rockets, mortars, and cruise missiles.
Are they buying with that $4 billion basically reload capacity? They're not buying new systems, are they? Or perhaps they're doing both. I'm not quite sure.
So that's a great question. It's both reload capacity and, in the case of Iron Dome, another factory. And there's been negotiations over a factory in, I believe, Arkansas would be the goal there, so that there'll be an investment there and an ability to kind of increase the procurement level of Iron Dome year over year. So that'll take a couple years to come into effect. But in the meantime, there's increased money for the capacity at the current plant, and there's increased money for capacity at the David Sling plant.
There is also 1.2 billion in the bill for the quote Iron Beam close quote defense system. What is Iron Beam?
So Iron Beam is a directed energy system. Again, Israeli, be done by an Israeli company, but a lot of work done in the United States. We're developing our own. We have one for destroyers called Helios, another one that's on the Army has, I think, on Striker vehicles. But the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy are kind of pushing down a directed energy. I think the reason behind this is cost per shot. We're having to deal with drones and cheap rockets that can cost somewhere between 20 and $40,000 a piece, and we're shooting them down right now with effectors, that is missiles that cost anywhere. The Iron Dome's the cheap end, around 30 or 40,000, but a lot of the other systems we've been using and the Israelis have been using cost $1 million around, or even more. So the idea is to shift to directed energy. And Iron Beam, this is a significant investment in Iron Beam. I think a low power Iron Beam is imminent. This would really be about getting to a higher power directed energy weapon for Iron Beam, so that they can decrease the cost per shot when they're dealing with threats from Hamas and Hezbollah and kind of local, IRGC proxy groups in Syria. Dealing with
Now,
them, Iron
Admiral,
Beam is going to be a cost effective way.
we've got a lot of Steelers fans listening, and even some Ravens fans. They have no idea what directed energy means. What's it look like? Is it like Cyclops and the X-Men with the visor? What is it?
I think that's about right. So it's a beam of energy that's formed by a power unit, and it is focused very specifically, and so it has to be a very a high this laser, has to be very focused and of a sufficient power, and then agile so that it can track, cruise missiles, rockets and mortars, can, cruise missiles can maneuver, rockets and mortars can become unstable and oscillate as they come in. And they're coming in sometimes at Mach speeds, 1,000, even up to 1,000 or 2,000 miles an hour. So this beam has to be able to track very carefully. So it has to have very good fire control to help place the beam. And the beam has to be very specifically applied to a spot on an incoming rocket or missile for seconds at a time. And in order to cause the damage to the microelectronics inside um, the inbound missile, or to destroy the coating of the frame of the missile in order to
Does it
cause
burn a hole in it? Is that what it does? Burn a hole in it?
I mean, metaphoric, yes. I mean, and the question of how it burns the hole, what it does to microelectronics can be slightly different between systems and depending on power. But basically, it does that. And so what happens is, as long as you give it juice, it's like your electric car, I guess. Now the recharge has got to be a lot faster, but you can constantly be engaging with an iron beam battery, shot after shot after shot after shot, and essentially, dollars on the shot versus tens of thousands of dollars on the shot.
Does the United States have this technology yet, Admiral?
We do. We're at about this. We're probably a little ahead of Iron Beam with our Navy and Army systems that we're just starting to field, but we need to get to a higher power as well. So we're also, you'll find similar kind of money, maybe not clumped together in one $1.2 billion thing like this, but similar amounts of money in the fiscal year 2024 and 2025 budgets to push directed energy. We're almost all the advanced militaries were slow to adopt this. We kind of like to see two things go smash, and we kind of understand that that's a destruction. So I think we've been a little slow to get to this, but we're running to it now because the cost per shot is hurt. Is really hard, especially against these Iranian Shahed drones that cost maybe $30,000 a piece.
The next line in what the speaker put out is fairly ambiguous. 3.5 billion for procurement of advanced weapon systems, defense articles, and defense services through the Foreign Military Financing Program. I don't know what that means. Do you?
Yeah, I do. And so we already have a deal with the Israelis. We give the Israelis about $3.9 billion a year, every year, in like a 10-year deal in foreign military financing, or FMF. So this is what they do with that is they buy U.S. weapon systems like joint directed munition, airdropped munitions, 155 millimeter artillery, weapons for their systems. And so what we're telling them, and it's spent in the United States. So what we're saying is, here's another 3.5 billion, kind of a plus up, to account for what you expended in this combat operation in Gaza, and to help you prepare better should Hezbollah engage you, or should the Iranians do an all-front war attack on you of some sort. So it allows Israel to replenish its American-supplied munitions and systems, about $3.5 billion worth.
All right, then we've got 2.4 billion for current U.S. military operations in response to recent attacks. I assume that's for the Houthi missile defense. Do you think that's what that is?
That's exactly it. It's for what the services have spent to be there. So it's for the ships, the aircraft carrier strike groups, and the ships operations, the squadron operations. Those two F-15 squadrons did a pretty good job. Last Saturday night, knocking down 75 to 80 drones launched from Iran towards Israel. So the operations of those, and then very specifically, it'll help get at the munitions problem. The Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, last week revealed, a big number. He said, we've spent almost $1 billion worth of naval munitions in the Red Sea. I think you might include the Eastern Mediterranean in that, the SM-3 missiles that were fired to defend Israel against ballistic missiles. So all of that collectively is 2.4 billion. My guess is, because when we put this the number together, we hadn't done the defense of Israel from that 300 drone and cruise and ballistic missile attack. That 2.4 billion is probably on the low end of what the military would want. But this reimburses them, because otherwise they have to pay for all these kind of operations and munitions out of hide. and cut some other money.
Admiral, before I move on, there's also $9 billion in the Israeli security supplemental for, quote, humanitarian aid. Some of that's going to go to Gaza, but do you have any idea where that goes and who divvies it out? That's a lot of money under a very big umbrella.
So our traditional, it is a lot of money, and I'm uncomfortable when they say this is part of the, support to Israel. I mean, I get you had to bin it somewhere. I mean, I want to say the things we talked about. I think there was one or two other small ones, like $1 billion to improve U.S. production for the missile systems that we tend to send to Israel. That's what I consider the Israel money. And then you're absolutely right. There's $9 billion in here for worldwide humanitarian usage. The only group, it'll be distributed initially by U.S. Agency for International Development. That's who does our kind of assistance money. But let me tell you, the one international agency that will not be distributing this, and that's UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Agency in Palestine, because they're banned in this legislation from being the distributor of this. So I don't know exactly who at the non-governmental organization level will deliver it, but I know who won't. And I think that was a good
Okay.
move for us.
In fact, there is a specific prohibition against UNRWA getting anything. Let me turn, if we can now, and I'll continue this in the next segment as well, to the Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental. This is only $8 billion total. So the humanitarian aid is $9 billion, and our Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental is $8.12 billion. Are you underwhelmed by that number? Is it better than nothing, or is it what we need?
Um, it is better than nothing and starting to approach what we need. Now, like, that's a weird thing to say. You're right. Well, it's a smaller number. Well, here's how deterrence against these authoritarian regime works. If I were to deter you in peacetime, it's going to cost me X to get my forces to show you my commitment, show you my capabilities and capacity. If I wait till combat starts, the number is going to be 3 or 4X. And we're learning that in Ukraine. We're learning that in Israel. So look, the reason I like this is the first time we've kind of said out loud as a Congress, and then and when the president signs it as an executive branch, that we actually need to do this kind of unique funding to get ourselves ready to deal with China. So I'm not underwhelmed. Do I wish could if you gave another 2 or 4 billion could be wisely spent? Yes. But having said that, I think this was a wise investment of 8 billion, and it would have only happened with the Ukraine and Israel initiatives tied to it.
Now there's 3.3 billion in this, and we might have to go in the next segment. 3.3 billion in the Indo-Pacific supplemental to develop submarine infrastructure. This will make our friend Captain Hendricks very happy, including investments in dry dock construction. Where are we going to build dry dock construction?
So I think it's too early to say exactly where. I will say this: this is about both fixing our ability to maintain our current submarines, which has absolutely fallen off the face of the earth over the last decade, and our ability to build new submarines. So we can build one Columbia class ballistic missile submarine a year and closer to 3 Virginia class. I mean, right now, you and I pay to build 2 Virginia class submarines a year, but we only get delivered to us about 1.3. So there's a big backlog developing because of secondary and tertiary supply chains. So this 3.3 billion goes to both building and maintaining. And as you and I have spoken before, in our war planning, we say unclassified, we need about 69 submarines to make it work. Today we have 52. We're heading in the wrong direction because of the retirement of the Reagan era buildup submarines. So we could get down as low as 48, 47, 46. But this will help bend that curve back over time.
What exactly is going to be purchased in the Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental? 3.3 billion to build submarines, some of it here, maybe some of it in Australia. Admiral, you think they're going to build a dry dock in Australia?
I think over time, the Australians will eventually build their own submarine capacity. Now remember, that part of what's called AUKUS, Australia, US, UK agreement, is Australia investing in our submarine industrial base. So this is going to leverage our own kind of suboptimal investments in our submarine base. It is improving in the last 2 years' budgets. Australian investment in our industrial base, and I'd still say we're playing catch up. So this is what happens when you stop thinking about a weapon system in 1990 and start thinking about again in 2014 or 15.
All right, let's move over to the Ukraine security supplemental. It includes 60.8 billion, of which 48.3% will fund the U.S. defense industrial base. First of all, it converts everything into a loan. I don't know what that means. It requires the administration to provide Congress within 45 days a strategy for prioritizing specific and achievable objectives. Are you optimistic about that document, Admiral?
I am. Let me. I'll try to. It's a really complex document to read, but what I'll say is you're absolutely right. Of the 60.8 billion, 48.3 are specifically defense industrial based things. It's basically about buying something in America. The question is how, or paying for American troops and soldiers. The question is the vehicle through which it does it. So this money isn't going to be corrupted or extorted or lost in Ukraine. It is literally going back into our system. So 23.2 billion is for replenishing U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps stores as we draw them down to pass them to Ukraine. That's what we've been doing traditionally. It's using something called presidential drawdown authority. It also is investing in our munitions. And I should have mentioned in the Taiwan one and in the Israel one, there's similar little plugs that actually just go to say, look, we right now we build, you know, 10,000 rounds a month of 155 millimeter artillery. We'll pay to have better factory production to get that number up to 15 or 20. So that's literally investing in factories in the United States. And it does this for 155, which is a artillery round, the PAC-3 cruise missile, the guided missile launcher round, the Gimlers that we fire, that are the Ukrainians have been firing, the javelins. We've all heard that anti-tank weapon, the standard missiles that we're firing in the Red Sea, the rolling airframe missiles we're firing in the Red Sea, all that kind of stuff. We're improving our ability to produce that, and we're providing 23 point, another group of money to do presidential drawdown authority to push that stuff to Ukraine. I expect there'll be the minute when the president signs this bill, within an hour or two, Air Mobility Command, our C-17 command, will be flying out of South Carolina and Missouri, to Europe, to Germany and Poland to deliver weapons. There's also 13.8 billion for Ukraine, for us to help Ukraine pick things to buy directly to U.S. factory. So instead of the U.S.
Yeah.
Army buying it to replace their stuff, here's another 13.8 billion for the Ukrainians to buy it. And then again, this is not a jobs bill, but the jobs supported by this bill are in 50 U.S. states.
I saw a map actually of every facility that is getting a purchase order out of this bill, and it's not 50 states, but it's awfully close. I didn't realize what they made in Maine and Ohio and California. I went to look at the states where I spend time. It's everywhere. This segment, Admiral, I want to talk about the $26 million for oversight and accountability for aid to Ukraine. Now, that's nothing compared to $95 billion that we spent overall. What's this 26 million for accountability supposed to do?
So the 26 million allows us, it's to ensure that we're properly inspecting and assessing the processes for the distribution of the funds that we're talking about. I mean, 95 billion is a big chunk of change of our taxpayer money. Again, I don't think it'll be going through, it'll do some due diligence on U.S. factories and things like that. But, we already do assessments, inspections of our own, several $100 billion a year worth of procurement in those same factories, like you said, in almost 50 states, but really concentrated Texas, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia. This is really about looking downrange. Are our operations that we're conducting in Germany and Poland, where we've had to hire, introduce extra U.S. service members and contractors to move this equipment, to train the Ukrainian forces that we bring out of Ukraine to train. And then, of course, the actual money spent inside Ukraine. Now, remember, part of that 60 billion Ukraine package was about $9 billion worth of direct financial support to the Ukrainian government. And this is that percentage that wasn't security money, and direct support to Eastern Europeans. And this is the money that's a loan. But previously it's been grants. So we're going through and making sure, is that money being properly used to keep the government, to keep the Ukrainian system functioning so it can use the weapons we have, with the training they do inside their country, things like that. So that we need inspectors to do that. It's a little expensive because you're not, it's a mix, a small number of U.S. people through our Office of Defense Cooperation in Kiev, and then contractors we hire to do these inspections. So my take is that's a pretty small. That's like an insurance payment on your car to make sure that the money you're spending on this overall package is getting spent well. I mean, I can promise you, President Zelensky does not have a yacht in Florida. He doesn't have a mansion there. That is not where the problem happens. I think at a very granular level, with the distribution of some of this money, there could be, we've seen this in U.S. aid money before. There could be misuse. This is Office of the Inspector General and other tools money to look for that.
So, Admiral, do you think we're going to switch now in the next segment to the total spent on TikTok and things like that? Do you think we've done our job on Ukraine? Do you think we've actually given them enough to persevere for another year in the war?
So I am impressed with this, right? This is the only way to deter authoritarians, right? Is to put either your blood or your treasure up when they bully another country like this. So and this is an integrated, President Bush had his axis of evil comments. I think he was 20 years ahead of proof. This is an axis of authoritarianism between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. North Korea is cranking artillery rounds over almost 3 million to Russia. Iran is providing Russia with Shahed drones and ballistic missile parts. And China is backstopping the Russian economy against the sanctions we've been applying and the oil, the ban on oil and natural gas purchases. So they're working like an alliance. We democracies need to work like an alliance, and that's what this is. And it also puts the spotlight back on the Europeans. You need to be doing your job. They've been passing some agreements inside their own multilateral and national assemblies to provide money as well. So I think combined, this gets at it. And if I can mention one other thing, it does direct the president to deliver long range ATACMS, which is a it's a 400 kilometer ish, range missile that can strike deep into Crimea, hit the Kerch Bridge, do real allow the Ukrainians to do real artillery damage to Russian logistics and command and control sites in occupied Crimea. So there's a lot of really good stuff here, Hugh, and so I do like it.
Admiral, the catch-all, the 21st Century Peace Through Strength Act, also passed on Saturday. We've talked about funding for Israel, funding for Taiwan and our Indo-Pacific, funding for Ukraine. Now let's talk about this catch-all act, and let's start with China. This will force the sale of TikTok or its closure within 1 year. Why is that important? And you might want to tell people what you did on the cyber solarium.
So thank you. Yeah. So this is Speaker Johnson's, addition to the Senate. That generally, what we've discussed earlier was generally what the Senate sent over, except with that loan correction that you mentioned for grants for some of that money. This is the big ad, and it's a really brilliant move by him and his team because it goes right at three of these authoritarians: Iran, Russia, and China. And on China, it very specifically goes right after the requirement to divest or sell TikTok from foreign ownership by a country of concern, China, to another ownership group from a friendly country or the United States, and probably the United States. Look, this was passed earlier to some fanfare about less than a month ago. Mike Gallagher's committee pushed it through, and as you mentioned, now former Representative Gallagher was chairman of the China Select Committee. He'd previously been chairman of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and he was chairman of the Cyber Committee of the House Armed Services Committee. So very focused on China and cyber. We worked with him over years to try to identify, foreign influence operations like TikTok and deal with them. And that's what's going on here. TikTok, the algorithm that drives what your children or grandchildren see on TikTok is driven by ByteDance, a Chinese company completely in the control of the Chinese Communist Party. So what came up on a TikTok when you enter, when you tried to access things, was very much an influence operation from the Chinese Communist Party. We saw it if you looked up things like support for Israel or support for Uyghurs, or a minority being suffering a genocide in China. Things like that were all 8 to 1 to 10 to 1 to 20 to 1 more likely, to be seen in TikTok than in Instagram, in a way that the Chinese Communist Party could affect our children. So what happened was that bill was going to languish a little bit in the Senate while Senator Maria Cantwell kind of dithered with it. She wanted a few things. One of them was an extension on the time to sell or divest before it's outright banned. And that's from 180 days to potentially 1 year. I think that's not the worst amendment you could have in it. So she got that one concession, but now it gets passed on Tuesday by the Senate, period.
It's a big deal.
Yeah,
it's a big deal. We got it done finally. Finally got it done. What about the provisions that implement sanctions on Iranian and Chinese technology transfers benefiting UAV warfare in Ukraine? How do we impose those? Who does that? Is that Sisyphus?
Well, so there's specific things in there. You're right. It's about Iranian oil and people who support them with it. Other companies and international companies that support the illegal sale of Iranian oil, missiles and drones, people who facilitate them getting missiles and drones, and very specifically UAV technology, and anyone who supports Hamas and Palestine Islamic Jihad, and some other things, and some senior officials in Iran. But you're absolutely right. The issue, these sanctions have existed before to limited, to some effect, and then to limited effect. That limited effect is when our allies and partners don't join us in this. So the Biden administration's responsibility here is to go out and pressure our allies and partners to follow suit, to properly enforce existing sanctions, and to consider new sanctions against Iran for its authoritarian behavior and its inappropriate behavior throughout the Middle East, but very specifically towards Israel.
No, I just want to read for people the sanctions provisions from the Iran summary. Sanction ports, vessels, and refineries dealing in Iranian oil. Sanction anyone involved in buying, selling, or manufacturing Iranian missiles or drones. Force the executive branch to fully implement sanctions on high-ranking Iranian officials. Impose sanctions on anyone supporting Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, other Palestinian terror groups. Stop Iran from accessing U.S. technology to manufacture missiles and drones. Update sanctions for using civilians as human shields. And sanction those producing the drug Captagon, which is manufactured and sold by the Assad regime. That was Brad Thor's most recent thriller, I believe. Does that all add up to anything in your eyes, Admiral? Do sanctions actually work?
Sanctions can deprive Iran of billions of dollars. As we saw recently, you can then mistakenly return those dollars, which is what the Biden administration did just prior, to and even after October 7th. So, from my perspective, sanctions can work. They can work well if you get significant allies and partners. I mean, we need to talk with India about this. We need to make sure they're fully engaged on implementing this. They're a fellow democracy. They need to worry about an autocracy, China, on their border. They need to be a little more sensitive to U.S. demand signals on this. So Europe, India, we're not going to get China or Russia to help with Iranian sanctions. We know that, but we need to, get our allies and partners on this. And I don't have a lot of confidence in the Biden administration's work on making oil more expensive between now and November, which is what pushing hard on the Iranian oil sanctions, that first one you listed, would do. I mean, there's reports they've even told the Ukrainians to take it easy on Russian oil distribution and refinery networks, and the attacks that the Ukrainians been doing on them. So I expect some hard work on the senior official stuff, on the missiles and drone stuff, on the Captagon drug out of Syria, but I don't expect much on the oil.
So let's put a bow on it, Admiral. When you look at the whole package, the $95 billion, are you very excited, okay, or not excited at all about what the House did?
I'm very excited. I mean, this is the first action by us in the last 6-9 months that says we're committed to the deterrence of authoritarian regimes on a reasonably bipartisan basis. Each of these bills passed with over 300 votes. To in the House, they'll pass in the Senate. I think they'll even be able to avoid being dragged out. With a 60 senator vote at one point. So this is the United States signaling its commitment to be the leader of the democracies that are opposing these authoritarian regimes. And that's important because if you stumble in one of these theaters in Taiwan, in Ukraine, in Israel, you stumble in all the theaters because the other authoritarians see that as a lack of will by the United States. And people need to understand that if we decide we're going to do something and protecting beleaguered democracies around the world is something we do, then you've got to stand up at every opportunity or at every confrontation and do something about it.
So, Admiral, have we done what we need to do, all told, all in? Because the president's budget that came up was in real terms a cut given inflation. Does this remedy that?
So you can't remedy, the direct investment in U.S. Procurement completely with this because this doesn't, this has several $billions worth of improving munitions. But I really appreciate that. In other words, there are billions of dollars worth of here that are just about our ability to produce, as I said before, standard missiles, Patriots, Javelins, all those things. There's also $540 million to just help PACOM with very specific things it needed but didn't get in the fiscal year 24 budget. So, those are good things. And that has better joint training teams in Taiwan, more money for the defense of Guam, more money for undersea warfare experimentation. So there's little nuggets all over this bill. I'd also mention it goes goes after cartels that are trading in fentanyl. Another priority of the China Select Committee, who released, along with Representative Barr's testimony last week, kind of a jaw-dropping discussion of Chinese direct investment, tax breaks for companies dealing fentanyl precursors to the United States. I mean, you can't make this up. It also repossesses $5 billion of Russian assets held in the United States for distribution to Ukraine. So it's all across the block. It really did a lot. But does it make up for a defense budget that doesn't track with inflation? No. But does it really fill in some of the gaps to make sure that our allies and partners are ready to fight and that we can do better munitions in the future? Yes.
Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you for getting up early for me this morning. I've read everything I could about this, and the specifics are just not there, and you provided a lot of them, and I appreciate it very much. I hope the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies puts out that kind of a summary as well. Follow the Admiral on X at Mark C. Montgomery. Follow the Foundation for Defense of Democracies at capital F, capital D, FDD. Thank you, Admiral. Great to talk to you this morning.
Thank you for having me, Hugh.
Always a pleasure.